Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Is this thing on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming to our event tonight, co-sponsored by the Retreat and NPSN, the Nurses Peer Support Network. And it's an opportunity really to learn from each other and provide support for each other and talk about how the 12 steps are a proven evidence-based practice that can lead to long-term recovery and sobriety for people, along with many other routes to sobriety. And my name is Rich Murphy. I'm the Director of Admissions and Marketing here at the Retreat. And what we're going to have tonight is John Curtis is going to be one of our presenters. He is the president and CEO and co-founder of the Retreat. He has been working in the treatment and recovery field for over 40 years, is that correct?
48.
48, yes.
Well taken.
And the Retreat is in our 26th year of operation right now, if you can believe it. And we offer men's and women's residential programs. You are sitting in the women's chapel where they have most of their meetings. And we just redid the Women's Center about 4 years ago, and it's beautiful. And then we have a plan to redo a whole lot of the Men's Center starting in April of 2025. And beyond our residential programs, we also have evening programs. It's kind of a non-residential, our version of outpatient in Wayzata and St. Paul. We have a 55-plus older adult program here in Wayzata, and it's a hybrid program, so people can attend it virtually as well as in person. We have a great family program. If you walked by the MacGyver Center on your way up here, we hold that there pretty much every other weekend, both in person and virtually. And we have 6 sober living houses in St. Paul. So we can help provide a whole continuum of care for people. If they want a long-term plan, we make it affordable and accessible for anyone that's interested. So I put a whole bunch of information out on the tables there. You can come see me afterwards with questions. If you need bathrooms, there's 2 of them right down that hallway on your right during the presentation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deb Anderson.
Good evening. We are so excited at the Nurses Peer Support Network to be partnering with the Retreat. So this is our second CEU event for a multi-professional group of healthcare providers. So we're offering CEUs tonight, not only for nurses, but for physicians, social workers, and licensed addiction therapists and counselors. So, and it's free. So that's, we feel education is such an important part of our mission. NPSN was formed 10 years ago. So we are not 26, but we're 10. And we formed to provide peer support for nurses in recovery. There's a lot of shame and stigma for nurses around being chemically dependent or substance dependent. And we also have a mission of education. So we provide educational presentations to academic settings, nursing schools, nursing organizations, and anyone else who want to learn about that topic. We started with 1 peer support group at the Recovery Church in St. Paul back in 2014. We now offer 13 peer support meetings per month. Yeah. Most of those are on Zoom, or we do a Tuesday night meeting that is only for nurses on the In the Rooms platform. It's a global platform, and we have nurses from all over the country who have found that meeting that we lead. We serve about 420 nurses in our peer support meetings per month. So we have really grown. I want to just do a little recovery self-disclosure here. My husband is with me tonight, and we were talking about it, and with his permission, the 2 of us have been attending 12-step meetings for a combined total of 67 years. So we, thank you. I'm sure if we tallied everyone just in this room, we'd have probably 1,000 years. But it's like, okay, how does this work? How does this 12-step program work? You know, 67 years of saying this Serenity Prayer every week And, so it's like, okay, how do we learn to accept what we have no power over? How do we find the courage to change our lives? And how do we become wiser in how we live our lives in a healthier way? So NPSN really is looking at helping nurses with self-care and taking care of themselves and supporting their recovery. Mark Meyer is on our board of directors, and Mark is a physician, a family physician and an addiction specialist with Wellia up in Hinckley and Pine City currently, and has been very active in the addiction field for some time as well. So we are excited to hear what Mark and John have to say about the evidence, because most of us, if we are in the health professions, evidence guides our practice. So we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Hi, Zoomers, too. If you need credits for all 4 of the categories, we will be emailing you a survey, and then you send it back, and we'll get you your credit certificate. And those of you here in the room, if you need credits, make sure you sign up on the sign-up sheets on the table there, and then we'll send that email to you as well. Okay, and I'll let these gentlemen get started.
All right.
All right, I'll take a seat.
Okay, well. So my name is John Curtis, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
I always like to do that because I get to feel if I'm in a friendly audience or not. So I know I'm in a friendly audience. Yeah, I've been around this a long time, 20 years at Hazelden and 26 and a half here at the retreat. And people say, how have you lasted so long in this field? Well, part of it is I have a program of living. I have a community of support. I have a sponsor. I have a bunch of sponsees. I have, so I'm plugged into my own personal recovery. And that keeps the flow going in and out so that I'm not just giving it all away and burning out. Plus, I love hanging out with alcoholics and addicts. They're just a fun bunch. And I love being on the bright side, the solution. So I thought we'd start off with, I think we have to put this little disclaimer on here. Uh-oh, where's it? Nothing's happening. There it goes, okay. And that's basically for CEU credits. We have to say that no one's making a lot of money doing this, basically, is what it's saying. I wanted to give you a little background on the history, because I think that, for those of us that have been in the addiction field, it's easy to kind of lose sight of where it all came from and how the addiction field started. So, in the 40s, the 30s and 40s, there was really no place for alcoholics to go but psych hospitals. And during the Governor Youngdahl's campaign and while he was governor of Minnesota, there was an article that came out in the national news called The Snake Pits. And they highlighted, the psych hospitals in Minnesota and just how alcoholics and addicts and everyone were just warehoused in horrible conditions, overdiagnosed, drugged up, and just kept in deplorable conditions. And this, behind every great movement, there's a strong woman that's on a mission. And this woman was named Engla Shea. And Engla was a Norwegian immigrant farmer's daughter, Marshall County, Minnesota. She worked as an attendant at Rochester State Hospital. And, her father went to the state hospital for depression. And they kept him there until he died 30 years later in the hospital. But she, being an attendant in the hospital, she was just blown away by the horrible conditions. And so she started kind of a one-woman campaign to shine a bright light on a very dark situation. And so she wrote tons of letters and started a whole movement around, we have to fix this. Now, Minnesota, kind of a Scandinavian, easily shamed population. This was not a good thing for Minnesota. And we wanted okay, we have to do something. And we have to find a more caring, dignified way to help people. So, they were kept in alcoholics were in locked wards, kept locked up with the psychotic patients. The follow-up study back in 1940 showed a 60 to 80% death rate. So not great outcomes. Churches got involved and a lot of people got involved to say, something's got to change. It was just a time of a lot of pessimism, despair, ignorance, prejudice. And some of that is still around, but we've come a long way from those dark days. Carl Menninger, who started the Menninger Clinic, he said, if I had a relative, I would rather have that person be a schizophrenic than an alcoholic. At least there's hope for schizophrenics. So that's kind of where the field was. And nothing would have existed in the addiction treatment field had it not been for Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the spark that kind of let people know that there was something happening with this kind of lay group of people who were just helping each other and producing very good outcomes. And so that was the beginning of the whole thing. And AA started in Minnesota with Pat Cronin, who hooked up with a couple of guys that came from Chicago to the Minnesota Gopher game, got caught in the Armistice Day blizzard. And they formed the first AA group, which was 2218 First Avenue South in Minneapolis. And Bill W. loved 2218. Dr. Bob, he was a big fan of the Nicollet group because that was the family group. But, they both loved what was happening here in Minnesota. So, now a lot of people had kind of attitudes about AA that were like, well, what is this group? The professionals, the psychiatrists thought it was just too simple, an explanation. It was the wrong explanation. Certainly alcoholism must be caused by some untreated co-occurring mental health issues. The clergy thought it was a competing religion. So they were kind of cold on it. The public just rejected it out of indifference. Practicing alcoholics, they rejected it because who wants to associate with drunkards that can't handle their own liquor? And even the psychotic patients in the hospitals thought that anyone that drank like this and kept it coming in and out and must have been out of their minds. So this was a profound revolution, and it happened with three kind of experiment programs that started. And I'm going to skip through. By the way, you have about 70 slides in this deck here. Now, I'm not going to go through every slide and every bullet point, but feel free to take them and read them because there's a lot of good information in there, and I think that it'll be helpful. But 1948, 49, and 50 was the window of the Minnesota Revolution that happened. And it started really with Pioneer House that started right up the road here where the Mission Detox is and the Hazelden Center for Youth and Family. I think it's Hazelden Plymouth now. And, Pat Cronin, who started AA 8 years earlier, said, I want to create a retreat center where people could go and just get out of the burning house of addiction and be in a safe, nurturing environment. And we can, bring a bunch of AAs in and talk to them about the steps, how to take the steps. And so Pioneer House started in 1948. And then a group of St. Paul, Minneapolis business leaders purchased the Power Family Farmhouse up in Center City, Minnesota. and their daughter's name was Hazel. And so it was Hazel's Den. And it was a little farmhouse. I think there were 13 people that were in that original home. And again, it was a retreat. And Lynn Carroll was an alcoholic in recovery lawyer who went up and stayed there with the guests and walked them through the steps and the big book and taught them how to live in recovery. And and then Wilmer State Hospital, Dr. Anderson, Dan Anderson, and Nelson Bradley, they had an inebriates unit since 1912. They had they had, let's see, 1,800 psychiatric patients and 35 inebriates, they called them at that time. And they started, they said, let's try something radical. Let's unlock the doors and let's bring AAs in to come in and carry the message, share their story. And lo and behold, something magical happened. But what they learned in this early time was that, number one, alcoholism existed, that it was an involuntary disability, it was autonomous, meaning it existed independently. It wasn't caused by some co-occurring issue that wasn't addressed. It was its own primary progressive chronic fatal illness. It was a multiphasic illness, multidimensional illness. The term that Dan Anderson used to use a lot, and I love it because it describes alcoholics so well, adaptive impoverishment. That we adapt to lives that no longer work for us, socially, spiritually, in every area of our life. We just it's the boiled frog analogy where you adapt to a life that's no longer working. Now, what they found is you can't deal with the comorbidity issues and ignore the chemicals, and you can't deal with the chemicals and ignore the comorbidity issues. I liken it to the gasoline-soaked rag analogy, where you have this house that's on fire. And, in the corner of one of the back rooms is a pile of gasoline-soaked rags that keeps reigniting. But you can't get to those gasoline-soaked rags until you put the burning house out. And addiction is the burning house. That you can't deal with all the other comorbidity issues that people are struggling with until you deal with the burning house of addiction. Get people sober, and then help them deal with the other issues that are going on in their life. You have to do all of it, but at that time for them, it was a timing issue. Let's get them sober first. Let's get them clear-headed, off of all chemicals, feed them well, love them up, surround them with a community of support, and then let's see what exists. Because most addicts and alcoholics look like a lot of pathological conditions when they arrive on day one. And, but you give them the gift of time, structure, and support, you begin to have a clearer picture on what's going on. It's a no-fault illness. You have to treat the family and treat everybody with dignity and respect. Love people, care about them. I'm speaking to a group of professionals here who get that. That's your line of work. And so anyway, I think that, interestingly enough, we found in the early years that it didn't matter whether somebody was came into treatment voluntarily or whether they were committed, the outcomes are the same. And there was a judge in Wisconsin that started sending people up to Hazelden. And there was some talk about, well, if you commit people, the outcomes aren't going to be great. Well, they researched it and they found out that the outcomes were actually the same. At some point, a person will eventually realize that it is about me, that I'm the one that has to change. And I'm surrounded with people who are offering me the solution. Alcoholics are motivated to feel better. And, it doesn't exist unless the community believes it exists. So it's the education that has to happen across the community is to let people know that it is a primary progressive fatal illness and there is a solution. And I think that once the community buys into it, lots of things happen. They also found out early on, and especially in the 70s, that, you know, when all the burned out hippies started showing up in treatment, and, you know, Vern Johnson wrote the book, I'll Quit Tomorrow, which basically taught people that you can intervene on people earlier in their life and help them get the help they need. They don't have to blow up every bridge in their life and spend the next, you know, 50 years of their life suffering. That you can help somebody when they're 20, 23. I was a 23-year-old scared kid that was sent to Hazelden with a one-way airline ticket. And I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew that I had blown my life up. I'd burned all my bridges. And they said, we're going to put you on this plane. We're going to send you to a place where you're going to learn how to be happy and sober. And I said, all right, you know, so little did I know I was going to spend the next 48 and a half years of my life here. But they told me there were mountains in Minnesota to get me on the plane. So I'm still here looking for those mountains. But the short goal of treatment, short-term goal, was to help people recognize the illness and its implication and begin to see the symptoms in others and then yourself. It's the we part of the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that once you're in a room full of people who are sharing the same story that you are, all of a sudden you don't feel that is isolated and is alone, and that terminal uniqueness that is so prevalent with all of us, that when we're suffering, we're alone. And so connect them to others, help them admit and accept they need the help, identify areas of their life that they need to change, step 6 and 7 of the AA program, and begin taking positive action, because it is a program of action. And, you know, it does require at some point for you to take your feet and walk in the right direction. And once you do that long enough, it becomes part of your heart. And that's what happens over time. So obviously let them know it's a disease, not a moral issue. There is a solution, and the solution lies in total abstinence and active involvement in 12-step recovery. At that time, it was simple. They had this idea that this was the solution. Now, today we talk about many pathways to recovery, and there are many. Is whatever pathway works for you, our hats are off to you. Make it happen. We're talking about today is from the historical perspective, they thought total abstinence, active involvement in 12-step recovery was the easiest and most effective way to help somebody. Oh, okay. All right. So, and then of course, long-term goals, that was unheard of at that time, long-term thinking about alcoholics. But create a warm, friendly, respectful environment, a total open environment. Unlock the doors. And at Wilmer, that was a radical thing. Let's unlock the doors and let the alcoholics roam around the campus. They said, you're going to have chaos on your hands. Well, it turned out that the escape rate dropped from 26% to 6%. You know, when they unlocked the doors, people wanted to be there. They wanted to stay. And then structure a sequential program, a beginning, middle, and you know, around the core functions of the helping field. And I think that, you know, one of the radical things that Dr. Anderson found and the early founders of the Minnesota model is that a lot of the co-occurring issues will disappear with the gift of time, structure, and support. So, and that was, you know, quite a surprise to them early on. So the Minnesota model is not just treatment, it's the full continuum of care, prevention, assessment, referral, outpatient, detox, primary residential treatment, extended care, halfway house, continuing care, family programs, sober living. I know because I went to all those things. And you know, we have to put people where they need to be at the right time. And what we all learn is that time is the healing factor. The longer you're in a structured environment where you're surrounded with the message and the community of support, the outcomes are better. Now, and I'm getting to my end mark, so don't worry. The decade of the 70s was an explosion of the Minnesota model of care. Every hospital around the country and beyond had a 20-bed, 28-day Minnesota model program. More people got sober in the decade of the 1970s than the previous 50 years. So the revolution saved millions of lives. And then of course, managed care got involved and said, we're going to try to save money and we're going to squeeze the bottleneck and make it harder to get into treatment and start managing cost. And, 60% of the residential beds closed in America in the late 80s and 90s. So, sometimes you cut off your nose to spite your face. And a lot of insurance providers are more concerned about this quarter's cost, not the 5-year benefits of providing the right care at the right time and giving people the full continuum that they need. And that's all I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mark. Mark, the floor is yours. I have 5 more slides after yours.
Hopefully it'll work.
You want to hold that just in case?
Yeah, it's dangerous though, because I like having a microphone. The Love Boat. Soon. No. I'm Dr. Mark Meyer, and more importantly, I'm Mark, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mark.
Nice to see you all. I was just thinking that, the first thing I wanted to say was I don't know what I'm talking about. Compared to most of the folks I'm talking about in my referring to in my talk, they're primary researchers in alcohol and drug use, and I'm not a primary researcher. I've practiced addiction medicine for quite a few years. So I kind of am a translator maybe of what other people have discovered with big brains. But I also think of one of my favorite commercials, this has nothing to do with my talk, by the way, I think it was from maybe the Super Bowl one year or something. It's an old guy who's standing out in the front yard, I think in his pajamas, like mowing the lawn. And he says, 90% of the time, I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. I just love that because it's true. All right. So why should we examine AA? Well, because alcoholism is a problem. It's been around forever. 30% of folks will have some type of alcohol disorder in their lifetime. That's from the NESARC in 2001 and 2002. That was a longitudinal study that went on for a couple of different runs. But as we've looked through the past decades, around 10% of folks actually receive any type of treatment for alcoholism and addiction. It's getting a little bit better with increased access, but so many people just do not have access either geographically or financially, et cetera, to go to a formal treatment. And therefore, more people use AA than any other resource really to address problems with alcohol. And, they're accessible. This 12-step programs are inclusive. They're inexpensive. You don't have to even put any money down if you don't want to. I think now it's been encouraged to give $2, and that's a pretty good damn deal for a 1-hour therapy session. And it's been shown to be successful. I think one of the struggles I've had being an addiction medicine physician is that addiction medicine tends to be about medicine. In other words, only looking at medications to treat different forms of addiction. And in reality, there's only about 5 medications that we know that we can use for addiction medicine. We just try to keep figuring out like different ways to use it. So it makes it look like, you know, I really do have a specialty in addiction medicine and it's worthwhile. Let me show you how to use this other drug for the 5th time. There just aren't a lot of great options because alcohol and addiction is a very complicated illness. So this is from 2021. There are about 2 million active members worldwide and 120,000 groups. Of course, AA does not keep formal membership lists. And from my experience in meetings, there are a number of people that are a little paranoid about, you know, having their name put on anything, which I can understand. It's an important thing to maintain the anonymous part of it. But that makes it very difficult to study because it's an anonymous program. It involves people. It's not as easy a thing to study as like a medication or a drug is in a trial. You know, we've gotten in medicine now, we're used to having, you know, the research is having a double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. And that is the gold standard for deciding whether or not something is worthwhile or whether it's not in medicine. And I think we've gone a little bit too far on that, but that's a whole nother study and a whole nother talk. But you can ask me afterwards if you want. But, you know, it's a true cross-section of people who attend AA because it's out there, it's available. And interestingly, the severity of alcohol-related problems is the strongest predictor of AA attendance. Gender really hasn't been found to be a predictor, although, you know, depending upon what the demographics are in a region, there may be, you know, more men in a meeting than women. That's true. I live in, you know, kind of the boondocks of Minnesota, and we actually have quite a few number of women in the meetings I go to, which is surprising because it's, you know, kind of a male-dominated area. It's, you know, where the men are men and so are the women kind of thing. Yeah. Sure. Is that better? All right. All right. Let me go back to my first slide. I won't do that to you. Sorry. Okay, Institute of Medicine 1980 and 89 said, you know, it's one of the most widely used kind of treatments for alcoholism, but it's been the least studied. And review of early research in the 90s said, you know, this is Emmerich, Tonigan, Montgomery, and Little. This is from actually a textbook about alcoholism treatment. In, you know, most AA research at that time had been pre-experimental in design. It wasn't a placebo-controlled trial that was used as a study for treating alcoholism. And, you know, it was unrepresentative kind of what they decided was, you know, a representation of the general population. So they had good points, but they also said that, you know, those who attend AA after treatment tend to do better. So, you know, there you go. It's like, well, it hasn't really been studied that well, but it works. Another review said that, you know, the rigorous experimentation has not been completed on Alcoholics Anonymous, and therefore, you know, we can't truly hang our hats on that as a recommendation for treatment. You know, but then you look at other studies and they say that there's always been shown to be at least moderate positive relationships between attending AA and having improved psychosocial functioning. So for many years, there were a lot of addiction medicine physicians that hanged their hat on this trial. Cochrane is a database of systematic reviews. It's an organization that they have smart people that look at all the different studies on a certain research area. They decide which articles are of quality, and then they combine all that data together and they say, well, you know, let's do a meta-analysis here to see if the research on this certain topic is of, first of all, if it's worthwhile, and second of all, you know, what the outcome really says. And unfortunately, that Cochrane review, the outcome of studying, a combined, I think it was 8,400 people in a bunch of different studies, that there was really found to be no difference between those that attended AA and those that didn't. They concluded that you really couldn't tell people to attend AA or not to attend AA. TSF. Oh, sorry. 12-step facilitations. Come on, you should have known that. I'm glad somebody said that because I probably would have forgotten too. I don't know. TSF, it's TMI. Who knows? But if I did look at this study and, the Cochrane review is highly dependent upon one single study that had been done by a Diana Chapman Walsh, who had randomized a couple hundred people into attending inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, and Alcoholics Anonymous. And as you look at the outcomes of the study, they finally just looked at 2 years out, what % of folks were abstinent at 2 years for those that had attended hospital inpatient AA meetings or had a choice of going to outpatient treatment or AA. And as you can see, it shows that AA meetings and choice were about the same and that hospital inpatient was a heck of a lot better. But there's a big problem. The thing is that people that went to hospital inpatient also went to AA. And they actually went to AA more often than the outpatient folks or those that were in the choice categories. So that's another problem with studying something like Alcoholics Anonymous is, there's a lot of mixing of study participants, contamination, we call it, that it's hard to keep people separated because, they'll go to AA if they want to. It's anonymous, there's steeped in tradition and there's a little bit of voodoo about it. People say, well, I don't know what goes on. Isn't it a cult, or a woman came up and asked me one time, well, isn't it brainwashing? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I needed a lot of brainwashing when I went in and yeah, okay, maybe it is, but it's not a cult in that once you get in, you can't leave. And actually, we will support you if you don't even want to belong. If you can go out there and drink or find a different way, hey, hats off. And then there's kind of this idea amongst folks too that it works and I don't care why. And that contamination makes it very, very difficult to study. As I said, some people think it's a cult. Some say, well, people self-select into AA. They decide that they want to get better. They go to AA. And then, of course, those folks are going to do better than those that don't. And also that, people with less severe psychopathology go to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not really been my experience. But, that was someone's opinion. Am I still walking off stage here? Okay, all right. And then there are those that think that Suboxone should be in the water supply. So there's research, two types of AA research. One is on Alcoholics Anonymous itself, and the other is on TSF, which is 12-step facilitation, which is not Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's a formal manualized treatment program that tries to introduce patients to the concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous and encourage them to attend AA both during and after treatment. And the goals are acceptance, surrender, and all the things we think about for attending and belonging to and participating in a 12-step group. Now, how do we establish causation, right? Because we can't do a placebo-controlled trial, it's hard to be able to prove that, if you have let's say somebody that has an infection, and you do X to them, like give them an antibiotic, that they end up as B, someone without an infection. It's hard to prove that, or it's easy to prove that with a medication, right? You can say, okay, you take somebody sick, you randomize them, you give some people a placebo, some people the real medication, and then you look later and whether they get better or not is easy to decide. But with things like Alcoholics Anonymous and other studies, you really can't do that, right? Because you can randomize people, but they'll contaminate. You can't really do placebo controlled, right? Because people know they're in an AA meeting. Although I have been to AA meetings before, I was like, I don't know if this is an AA meeting or not. It was more like just, group sharing for the hour. But we have to look at 6 different things, I think. One is strength of association. So, in other words, is more of an intervention going to cause more of an outcome? Which I think, alcoholics themselves know is true, right? Like if 1 is good, 2 is better, right? So we know that. That's kind of the strength of association with alcohol use. 1 is good, 2 is better, etc. Dose response relationship, same thing. Is more of it better than less? Consistency, do we see this across different trials that yes, more than one trial shows that something like AA works? Is it temporally correct? In other words, do you have a ill person, you give them something and then they get better? Or, do you have an ill person and then they get better before you even give them the intervention? You want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Otherwise, it kind of negates the recommendation for that intervention. Specificity, is it leading to a certain outcome every time? And then does it make sense with what we just kind of know about, life and science in general? We'll start out with strength of association. Many studies have been done. Most, unfortunately or fortunately, have been done on males throughout the years, and most have been done through VA systems, just because those were folks that had a lot of alcoholism and addiction and were easy to access. This was a study on about 3,000 male veterans, and they looked a year follow-up after someone had received treatment, and also looked at those that had just gone to AA and NA. And they found out that people that had gone to AA or NA for months 9 through 12 were more likely to be abstinent, had more freedom from substance use problems, had less psychiatric distress, and were more often to be employed. So, there's a relationship there. There's a strong relationship between somebody having a disease, you do an intervention, and they get better. This is from a different study, Timko et al. It's from the Journal of Studies of Alcoholism. And they looked at folks that had attended formal treatment in the dark blue or formal treatment plus AA, which is in the lighter blue. And they looked at 1-year and 3-year follow-ups, and people that went to formal treatment, NA, did twice as well. So strength of association, yes, A intervention equals B. Dose response relationship, is 2 actually better than 1? Many different studies have shown that the more meetings, 12-step meetings people attend, the better they do long-term. So 3+ per week has been kind of the minimum that's been decided to be the most effective. More meetings leads to more abstinence, and weekly attendance predicts abstinence in many different studies. I don't have time to obviously cover all of the research in detail, but there's many more than this that have showed that dose response relationship. If you go to AA or other 12-step fellowship meetings more often, you're bound to do better. And this was a look at a couple hundred folks. And what they wanted to find out is, looking at the number of meetings people attended in year 1, did it lead to long-term abstinence? And so they looked at folks that didn't go to AA, that had 2 to 4 meetings a week or 5+ meetings a week. And in year 1, 5+ was about 3 times as better than those that didn't go to AA at all. And, 1.5 times better than 2 to 4 meetings a week. At 8 years, it's still stuck. Even better, actually. 73% of those folks that had attended AA, they only looked at year 1, so we don't know what they did after that. We're doing much better. So, yes, there was a dose-response relationship. More is better. 2 is better than 1. So above 3 meetings a week, overall has kind of been found to be the minimum attendance for the better or best outcomes for those with substance use disorders. All right, are there consistent outcomes? Many studies. This is kind of a meta-analysis of different ones and looking at those that haven't gotten any type of intervention, had outpatient treatment only, AA only in red, and then AA plus outpatient. And as you can see, 1, 3, and 8 years, the folks in AA and AA plus outpatient did better than the others. Again, consistent. Is it temporally correct, and is there specificity? Talk a little bit about Project Match. This was a huge study. I think it's the largest psychosocial study that's ever been done in the United States. It cost $27 million in 1989, which is a lot of money. And what they did is they took some folks and randomized them into, what they wanted to find out is what type of treatment would lead to the best outcome for those that have alcohol use disorders. You know, could they figure out what you know, if there was a certain type of personality, let's say that this treatment applied to this personality type led to better outcomes for alcohol treatment. It was 952 patients in the outpatient arm and 774 aftercare patients that had received formal treatment and then were in kind of like a, you know, an ongoing relapse prevention group, let's say. And there were 3 methods of treatment. They randomized folks into cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is basically where you try to change your thinking about things, the internal voice that says, you know, you're awful. You can not listen to that and say, I'm actually really awesome, right? Or if you guys are not going to cooperate, I'm going to back this sucker up to slide 1. I swear to God. I'll do it too. Motivational enhancement therapy, which is trying to move people along a spectrum of willingness to change behavior. And then TSF, there we go again. I'm glad you asked the question. I only put this in here because it is amazing the follow-up that they had with this number of patients. You know, there's in any study, there are so many folks lost to follow-up that it almost invalidates a lot of studies because, you know, you don't know what happens to them. You have to assume that it was a bad outcome, but not all studies assume that, and they reject those people, and then, you know, kind of it ends up fudging the research to look like it's successful when it's not. But they looked at folks up to 10 years out from the initial randomization, and there were still 85% of people that they were in contact with. That's amazing. I've never seen follow-up that good. You know, especially in my 10-year high school reunion. Project Match showed that the frequency of meeting attendance, as well as overall involvement at months 1 through 6, predicted a better outcome in months 7 through 12 in an outpatient group. But they really found in the end that there weren't any statistically significant differences between those 3 interventions: CBT, MET, or 12-step facilitation. Looking through the research, I think one of the problems is that everybody received, you know, really good, solid treatment. And, you know, it was, in the case of TSF, it was manualized. They had awesome attendance. CBT, the same thing. And, you know, it kind of leveled out the playing field such that there were really good outcomes in all 3 groups. And that was for the aftercare group. But they did find an improvement in those that went to the outpatient treatment for CBT, MET, or TSF. And at 1 and 3 years, those that had TSF intervention and going to AA did much better than those that did not. And it did reach statistical significance. So for you dorks that care. All right, so that's also specificity there. Now, okay, so they found out that those folks in the outpatient arm did better when they had 12-step facilitation, but people started asking like, okay, but again, are these folks more motivated to get better than others? Do they have a more supportive family, let's say, than others? And that's the reason why they're getting better in 12-step facilitation in AA than others. Well, many researchers have looked at the research outcomes for Project Match, and have found that there are some personality differences. There was also this study done on about 2,300 male V8 patients, and they did some cool statistical stuff that I don't really understand. And they found out that actually those that were more motivated at baseline had worse alcohol problems at 2 years. Those that had less motivation ended up having less alcohol problems and more participation at the end in 12-step recovery or abstinence than others. And those that had severe psychopathology, there really wasn't any difference between AA involvement or alcohol problems when you looked at 1 and 2 years. So I thought it was interesting that motivation seemed to be negatively associated with outcomes. I think I can kind of make sense of that, because sometimes if there's too much self-efficacy, it's like, well, I got this now, I can handle it, and I'm Audi 5,000, and hopefully those folks make it back if they do. But sometimes a little bit too much self-efficacy, doesn't do a person good. So the other thing that Project Match found was those that had those that did not have a supportive social system at home did better in AA. Angry alcohol clients had better outcomes using motivational enhancement therapy. I see a lot of angry alcohol patients. I'm not sure how they decided who was angry and who wasn't, but and those that had high dependence on alcohol appeared to do better in TSF rather than CBT. The problem is that there's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational enhancement therapy inherent in 12-step recovery. I mean, it's all about getting things out of your head, onto paper, talking to others, making an inventory, making a dedication to change the way you act and hopefully think eventually. So it's really hard to parse some of that stuff out when it's included in the whole package. So is there coherence with existing knowledge? Like, does it make sense that AA works? And I think it really does. Of course, it does to us folks that are in recovery. But from looking at the outside in, you could say that as well. Whoa, that's really small. Does that look small to you guys too? All right. So again, this self-efficacy, the confidence to reduce or stop drinking. In Project Match, there was a better outcome when AA participation predicted self-efficacy. It was also shown at 3 years. But again, it was not just the motivation. It was, attendance in 12-step recovery that led to self-efficacy eventually and longer-term recovery. Both folks had enhanced friendship networks and coping responses when they had gone to AA. And AA involvement were in that type of support received from AA members contributed to abstinence at 3 years following a treatment episode. So again, mechanism of efficacy makes sense. There's increasing social support, improved coping skills. We already talked a little bit about that. CBT is about that, but it's also inherent in AA. And, if you look at affiliation versus just involvement, like, do you just go to AA or are you involved in it? Those that are just going to AA alone and not involved, aren't as likely to have longer term success. And I think that kind of makes sense for those of us that have personal experience. Across 16 studies, the strongest evidence for being involved in AA and meetings was having a sponsor and being more involved in AA than in the past. That led to better outcomes. The next strongest evidence was for leading an AA meeting or doing 12-step work and a much weaker relationship for sponsoring others and working the last 7 steps, and really bad for working only the 13th step. But it's interesting when you look at that, like, you know, why is it that leading an AA meeting doesn't have as strong as association as having a sponsor? I don't know. Maybe it's the type of sponsor, I guess. Now, there's a new Cochrane review that came out in 2020. It was like, yes, thank you, God. Because there are addiction medicine physicians out there and addiction psychiatrists, including in the state of Minnesota, that have claimed that recommending a patient to go to AA is malpractice. And you could get your butt sued if you refer them to AA and there's a negative outcome. And most of the time, people kind of hang their hats on this Cochrane review from 2006. John's going to go into much more detail about this study. But they looked again at AA 12-step facilitation compared to things like CBT. And this time, really great quality studies. There wasn't as much kind of contamination in studies as there was in the first Cochrane review. And, you know, there was greater abstinence at 12 months, consistent even at 24 and 36 months for those that went to AA and 12-step facilitation. About 1.5 times, 1 1/3 times as well as the others. So in the end, the evidence was suggesting that 42% of participants in AA would be still abstinent at 1 year, compared to 35% of participants that got other treatments, including things like CBT. Now, 42% versus 35% doesn't seem like a big deal, but let me tell you, when you're studying an intervention in medicine, that's a huge difference. I mean, we make a big deal in medicine if you go up from, you know, 35% to 35.04%. It's like, oh my God, everybody's got to be on Ozempic. So, conclusions, despite my babbling, there is a strength of association. Overall, about 2 times higher abstinence in those that attend AA compared to not. Higher attendance equals higher abstinence. Multiple studies show the consistency of that intervention, and it's temporally correct. You know, that folks that have been using alcohol, down and out, get the intervention, better outcomes with abstinence, and even decreased drinking later on. And it's difficult to support specificity, but, you know, we have models that support that. And of course, it makes sense when we think about it in more general terms. This is where you can look for other information if you care. And this is kind of my summary, blah, 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 blah. And this is one of my favorite slides. Because sometimes when something works, I don't really care why. You know, we get all up in our undies in medicine about something being placebo controlled and what's the evidence and blah, blah, blah. If something works, I don't care if it's a placebo. If I'm meeting with a single individual and you know, attending AA for them is being successful, I don't give a crap what the other statistics say. It's working for that individual. You know, we kind of went there in medicine where we now need to have everything that's, you know, properly studied. But when you go down to the nitty gritty of it, I mean, you know, maybe it's okay to not really know why it works. Maybe it's okay that there's some, not magic, but, you know, incredible mysteries and mysterious happenings that take place. And you know, we're left kind of in awe of that mystery and wanting more. Okay, that's all I got. The Love Boat. Oh, hey. Soon we'll be making another run. That was a key change.
Good. You're good. Thank you, Mark. So I want to just dive in a little more to this, the most recent Cochrane study. This is where Stanford, Harvard, and the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction set out to answer the question. Just because AA is popular doesn't mean it's effective. And they wanted to figure out, okay, what do we have to do to find out, is it effective? Now, Dr. Kelly was asked, why are we doing this? He said, well, first of all, we're studying alcohol because it's the world's favorite drug. It's also the world's most lethal drug that confers harm in terms of premature mortality, death and disabilities, and a huge economic burden to our country. So what they did is they used the Cochrane collaboration, which is the gold standard for medicine in terms of assessing which interventions work. The authors searched the world's largest databases for all research ever done in any language on the effectiveness of AA relative to other addiction treatments. They used predetermined standards for research designed to identify the most rigorous and relevant studies. Then they reviewed the top 36 reports for any evidence of bias and graded the quality of the evidence. Their final meta-analysis included 36 reports, 25 different studies on the clinical outcomes and cost savings of Alcoholics Anonymous. They involved 150 scientists in 67 different institutions around the world with 10,000 research subjects. The most important conclusion, even though Alcoholics Anonymous was invented by peers and not professionals, the science supports what they did. In fact, people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous are 20 to 60% more likely to end up abstinent than people who do not. Compared to other treatment modalities, professionally delivered therapies, outpatient treatment, mindfulness, meditation, education programs, when looking at complete abstinence from alcohol, every study suggested that AA was as good and often better than other addiction treatment modalities. In a third of the studies, AA was better by a large margin over other treatments. For example, 60% of more people stayed abstinent through AA than cognitive behavioral therapy. AA also helps people stay abstinent over the long run. It was more effective than other treatments at every time point post-treatment, 6 months, 12 months, all the way out to 3 years than any other modality of care. At the same time, there are some people who go to AA and don't end up fully abstinent, but they cut their drinking by a lot, those that participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. In terms of alcohol-related consequences like health problems, missed days of work, DUIs, relationship problems, AA was as good or better than other treatments at reducing harmful consequences. Another major finding was the societal perspective from healthcare system perspective is the ability not just to produce higher remission rates, but do it at a much reduced healthcare cost. People are not going to emergency rooms. They're not ending up in hospital beds. They're not using mental health and formal clinical addiction services as much. AA produced significant cost savings in 4 out of the 5 studies. AA participation reduced healthcare costs by as much as $10,000 per patient over 2 years relative to cognitive behavioral therapy. The takeaways: the most rigorous data available on Alcoholics Anonymous shows that it can help people get sober, stay sober, drink less, and suffer fewer negative consequences of drinking, all the while keeping the healthcare costs down. As Dr. Kelly says, it's the closest thing we have to a free lunch in the public health sector in our country. So I think the message that we want to convey to people is, in all the different therapies and technologies and things that you're using to help intervene and help patients recover from addiction, AA should be at the top of the list in terms of that referral. It will save them money, it will save you money, and it will produce better outcomes. So when I look at this retreat experiment that we have here, when we opened the retreat 26 and a half years ago, Dr. George Mann, the founder of St. Mary's Treatment Center, and I came from Hazelden, We had medical directors from treatment programs throughout the Twin Cities that were part of our think tank group. We had longtime recovered people and business leaders and members of the 12-step recovery community. And we said, you know, let's do this one thing really good. Let's create an environment that just immerses people in the steps and spirituality of Alcoholics Anonymous and connect them. These are people who know they have the problem. They're motivated for change. They want to change, and create an environment where they can connect with a whole world of recovering people. We have 400 volunteers coming in and out of the retreat every month, carrying the message of hope and recovery. 88 different AA and Al-Anon groups that bring meetings out to the retreat to help people understand what it's like to live in the front row of 12-step recovery. That is what we're about. And for 26 and a half years, we've been researching our model. We had one research firm out in Oregon that measured everything we did here, from when they arrived, when they left, 3, 6, 9, 12 months out, and followed them for 17 years. We did outcome studies and found that 54% of our people are continuously sober 12 months out, which for a chronic whole life illness that requires a whole life change, that's a pretty impressive number. Now we're right in the middle of a study with Harvard and Dr. John Kelly with a 3-year outcome study, and I don't have any data on that yet, but when we get it, we'll be happy to share it. I hope it's good. I think it'll be good. So anyway, I think that's really it for us, and we want to open it up to questions and comments and rebuttals. Thank you.
If anyone in the Zoom chat has questions, you can just write it in the chat and Travis will read it out. But does anyone here in the room have a question they want to ask?
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm an alcoholic, and I have both like a question and a bit of a suggestion. Would you consider including the parachute paradox as a part of your presentation on why it works, or the effectiveness of AA as a program? Parachute paradox being you're showing all this information and having Cochrane reviews and talking about the methodological issues with some of the studies going into it. People believe that a parachute will be very effective in saving someone's life if they fall out of an airplane. As far as I know, there's never been a randomized placebo-controlled trial on a parachute. Same concept. For life-saving things like this, it's really difficult to have a randomized trial to demonstrate outcomes. So something like this, it's using those single arm, this is what we see relative to historical control. That's about the best you can do.
I'd suggest you put that in your slides. I'll put it in my slide.
That's why studies on obstetrical delivery are very few and far between, because, you know, we know how that we've got a good way to deliver babies. It works, and nobody wants to change that, because even one increased death would be, you know, a horrible outcome. So I totally agree. The parachute outcome, the paradox I thought you meant was that, you know, if you can, you know, open your parachute if you want or not, if you jump out of an airplane. But now I get what you're saying. I was like, yeah, hell, I'll put that in, no problem. I mean, heck, I'll put that in the plane.
I have a question. Has anybody gone back to the General Service Office and asked where those numbers came from that they tell us about in the foreword of the second edition, 1955, 50%, those who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once, 25% after some relapses. I'd like to think they didn't pluck that number out of the air.
Good question. I don't have the answer to that. Yeah.
I mean, no one that I know has asked that question again. But I'll write your name down. Mike. I totally get what you're saying, because it seems a little fantastical, but, yeah, I don't know if anybody really going back and looking at that or asking, just sort of assume that it's true, but, you know, who knows where it came from.
Question for you, two questions, actually. One, aside from the Harvard study, are there other significant research projects going on now? And the second one is, what is the insurance company's rationale for not supporting a program like the retreat?
Oh, well, you know, part of it is the whole system is run by medical professionals. And when you have something that is kind of a social community based, well, it's interesting. You know, my graduate degree's in healthcare administration. We had a bunch of doctors on our think tank group that helped put this thing together. And we came out with, at the end of it, saying we have to take it out of healthcare and integrate it back into the community. You know, we're not going to solve America's addiction problems with more $50,000 to $80,000 a month treatment programs. We have to find a way to drive the care of addiction to the community level and to make it much more affordable, much more accessible, and begin to work on changing culture. And, you know, that's the big question. How do we get to that place? And we do believe that there are many people who are, you know, being treated in a highly clinical, multidisciplinary treatment model that could have benefited from a more supportive educational model rather than that. But, you know, that's the system is built around that machine. And, you know, about other studies, Harvard just put out another study looking at the recovery capital, so that when they say that for a recovering alcoholic, it takes about 5 years to develop that full recovery capital in their life, where their social life, their financial life, their health, their relationships, vocational. 5 years. I know it. Jeez. Yeah. So, and what they said is what expedites that is a minimum of 4 AA meetings a week, a relationship with a sponsor, and doing service work. That when people do that, they receive that full recovery capital much quicker. And those of us that are in the program and in this recovery world, we see that every day with people. You know, we say, well, where does it happen? We say, well, it happens in love and service. If you sit yourself in the front row and not be a 5 and 5er and a visitor where you go 5 minutes early and leave 5 minutes late, you're in the middle of the herd. You're active. You're involved in caring about other people. You're helping others. It's that transition from that isolated, self-centered bubble to other-centeredness. And when you move into that mode, the quality of your life improves. Anyway, that's what we're finding.
Numbers on rate of relapse, the longer you're sober, so first 6 months versus 1 year.
Well, I'll just say that the everyone looks good in treatment.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're all saying the right things. They've been bathed with nurturing and love and fed well and cared about. And then they leave on the pink cloud. That 3 to 8 week window after they get out is kind of a critical period of time. If you look at the incidences of relapse, they happen more often and this is not just the retreat, but treatment across the board. That it takes about the first 2 weeks, everybody's patting you on the back. You're kind of on the pink cloud. But 3 to 8 weeks, the ego reemerges, the old friends start showing up again, the old girlfriend starts knocking on the door. Next thing you know, you're back in the game again. So that's a critical period of time, which is why we focus so much on the continuum of care, where, you know, people go to a primary program and then they go to sober living or outpatient matched with sober living, because they have, you know, when you have more eyes on you and more people who can hold you accountable to those first few steps in that first year of recovery, your outcomes are going to be significantly better.
It's also interesting for me now. I practice in a rural, really rural area in Minnesota, and you know, the access to quality addiction treatment and AA actually is quite different than it is, you know, this close to the heart of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And you know, for patients that I've followed informally that have gone to treatment, you know, first 24 hours is key and critical for most, because they don't have supportive families, most of them. You know, it's a family disease, and these folks don't have the means and ability to really change that environment. And if there isn't an immediate involvement in some type of supportive care immediately, you know, I just see horrible outcomes. Leanne Kaskudis is a researcher out of the alcohol research group through Berkeley and Stanford area, and she's done a ton of research, and a lot of her research has been on how to get people actively involved in Alcoholics Anonymous coming from a treatment type situation, rather than just saying, you know, here's a list of meetings, make sure you go to AA, you know, in the first 24 hours. It's getting people actually to meetings, you know, name, face, handshake, taking you from point A to point B, and what much better outcomes there are when there's an active involvement of somebody else getting someone involved in AA, rather than just, you know, kind of the passive, we know it's good for you, you should go do it, and, you know, if you don't, it's bad kind of thing. So. Not, you know, but bringing that up, you know, sometimes it's easy to forget the amount of addiction and alcoholism there is in the elderly community as well, and folks that, you know, don't have the structure of a family or a job, or, you know, needing to be accountable anymore. What a risk factor that is, not only for use, but also relapse into substances. Not to mention, you know, co-occurring medical and psychiatric illnesses that can happen more commonly as we age. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think engagement in community is so important. And, you know, we see, you know, a lot of young people who are fired up with Icky Paw and very involved in all the social activities around recovery, and there's this great energy. And, you know, we have our older adult program, 55 plus. I kind of resent it being 55 plus, actually, older adult. I think it should be 70 plus. But, you know, what we find there are that, you know, people have, you know, raised families, they've run businesses, they've had a successful life. Then all of a sudden they retire and the phone stops ringing and they're alone. And their spouse may be passed on. And now, you know, what happens to my life? And how do I find that next mission in my life? How do I engage in a new community of friends and support networks? And that's really important to try to help that group get connected to the community and find their next mission.
We have a question on Zoom. Dr. Heidi is curious about any thoughts you have on the mediating factor of spirituality as contributing to the efficacy of the 12 steps.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I'm all for it.
Uh,
It's a spiritual solution. And, you know, a lot of people hear that and they go, oh boy, this is a cult. It's a religious organization. It's, and, you know, AA is not a religious organization. It basically says you need a power greater than you. And a lot of people find that initially in the we part of the program, that the power of this community of people have plugged me into a light in my life. And from that, they grow, they develop their own sense of spirituality. You know, no one in AA tells you what your higher power should be. It's up to you to decide what it is. We know one thing, it's just not you. And
you know, in primary care, one of my biggest struggles with those that have alcoholism and addiction is you know, sort of getting them to understand that currently their higher power is alcohol or a drug. And it's difficult to change thoughts and behavior around that because it's so, the outcome is so predictable, right? Using a pill always does this to me. Whereas using some type of social support, et cetera, there isn't that immediate feedback that goes into them, you know, mesocortical limbic dopaminergic system that says, hey, let's do this again type of thing. You know, and people's inability to immediately change their mood and immediately change their pain level is a huge factor why folks just aren't able to recover, in my opinion.
And addiction is not the only chronic whole life problem that people struggle with that require whole life solutions. So there are many other conditions, diabetes, heart disease, that require you to find a different, you know, a different way of dealing with stress in your life, learn how to meditate, you know, find connection to community, eat better, exercise, you know, so it's the same thing with substance use.
Anyone else have a question?
Thank you. Fabulous. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder, if you are needing credits, we will email you the survey tomorrow and then you get your certificate. Those of you that came in a little late, if you need credits, make sure you sign in on the sign-in sheet. And Deb from NPSN and I will be out there in the hallway if you have questions about our programs, and we have materials to share too. Thank you so much for coming. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Mark, wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good to see you, John. Thank you.